Go ahead.
Cool, thanks. Rick, were you going to do an intro or?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. This is our second session on the importance of product management to startups with Mark Berman. Our first session was on Wednesday for 1 hour. We didn't complete the entire agenda for that one, so we'll be picking up here today on that topic. There'll be a quick review of the things that we covered on Wednesday for anyone who might not have attended then. And then we're going to allow plenty of time today for open discussion and Q&A. All right, Mark, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Rick. So as Rick mentioned, today's session is to, hopefully drill a bit deeper into the life cycle of a product. So from idea all the way through to implementation and getting a product into customers' hands. A lot happens between each of those various different phases. So I thought what I'll do is provide a couple of examples, share some best practices with you to kind of talk through in a bit more detail some of those scenarios. As Rick mentioned, we'll do a little bit of a recap, hopefully not spend too much time here, and then just focus the bulk of the session on examples. So previously we talked through a wireframe example. I'll kind of recap that and then show what the tooling experience is like for wireframing. I'll also walk through a competitor matrix example. We'll review the roadmap that I previously shared, and also just kind of touch a little bit on business model. I think there's some important pieces there that also help when it comes to thinking about going after customers and how do you acquire customers and so on. We'll talk through a success metric and then how to use that success metric, how to get insights into this specific success metric using a variety of tooling to both understand usage and understand conversions. But the idea is hopefully this should stimulate good dialogue. This isn't intended to be an exhaustive list, but it's hopefully just to like I say, share some best practices and learn from some things you're doing, and have good discussion and hopefully help you solve some challenges that you might be having in your world. So just to recap, why product management? So in many ways, the product management discipline is about these three core things. It's about balancing what a business has set as their sort of goals and their desires with building something that customers actually want, and then also being able to get to market in a timely and cost-effective manner. For many of us as founders, we've all worn each of these hats. Sometimes we skew a little more heavily depending on where we're at in the life cycle, maybe more towards business when we're trying to fundraise, maybe more towards building what customers want when we're trying to focus on an MVP, and so on, and maybe getting to market faster when there's competitive pressures. But really, in many cases, the product management discipline is trying to balance these three things, and oftentimes that's quite a challenge, especially as founders, as we're trying to fundraise, as we're trying to grow a team, while still learning and doing all these things, just to kind of push the dial forward. So we have a bunch of tools at our disposal. Once again, this isn't intended to be an exhaustive list, but it's a way to kind of break down some of the various different phases as we kind of come up with an idea, evolve the idea into some type of plan that we're going to go after, iterate and improve the idea, and then take the idea to market. So some of the things that we touched on previously is things like doing competitive analysis to try and inform who we're going after from a competitive perspective, how we might differentiate ourselves and so on. And I'm going to show an example in this. We also talked through a little bit around formulating a plan. So getting real prescriptive about who you're going after from a persona perspective, trying to unpack what some of those problems are that a user might be facing, and documenting out a set of stories. Oftentimes, if there are existing technical solutions that kind of solve a problem, more often than not, there's multiple ways to solve that problem. Trying to document each of those, see where the overlap is often a fairly useful exercise. And then hopefully using all of this to try to inform from a prioritization perspective what's being built when, what comes first, what comes second, and so on. And we showed a wireframing example, which I'll show again, and then kind of, like I say, talk through some of the tooling, and then also talk through, cool, so maybe you've got a fairly rough set of wireframes. How do you evolve this into something a bit more polished that maybe gets closer to looking like the real thing? Also, just to recap, we talked about ways to validate a plan using surveys. I'm a big believer in survey as much as possible. Well, not as much as possible, but doing surveys at the right time is hugely important. And of course, there's always the balance of not sharing too much, but just sharing just enough to try to inform and guide, especially when it comes to prioritization, what you're building and when you're releasing what you're building and who you're going after from a competitive perspective, if that's a core focus, how you might be pricing something, and so on. And then we also touched on doing some type of A/B testing, and I'm going to share a couple of examples around A/B testing, and then also around analytics, using things like Google Analytics and some other tools to try to get some insights into customers that might be using something that you've built and released and whatnot. And then lastly, of course, there's actually going to market, so maybe post MVP. Maybe MVP was you kept it a little restrictive, focused on a select audience, and once you've ironed out some of the kinks and confirmed that what you've built is going to achieve what customers hopefully want, then going to market makes complete sense, and having some success metrics, once you've launched, which we'll walk through an example. So before I move on, are there any questions following the whirlwind recap? Great. So the scenario that I showed last time was using an add-on to PowerPoint called Power Mockup. I mentioned that I'm a big fan of not letting technology get in the way, and I think PowerPoint, for all the pros and cons of presentations, I think PowerPoint is actually a super interesting tool to take an idea and document that idea. So this was an example that I'm just going to recap quickly. A real world that I worked on where, from a simplistic perspective, the idea is you have a website and you want to be able to be notified when there's maybe a performance issue, when the website goes down, and so on. So the simple concept is a user hits a homepage, much like Google, nice and simplistic. You get to type something in. In Google's world, you get to type something you want to search. In this world, you get to input your website and get some feedback about that. So just to kind of walk you through this, the idea is you type in your website, you hit go. What you get back is some graphical view that kind of shows, in this example, that some monitoring is being done from a certain location. The blue box is signifying where your website, from a hosting perspective, has been geolocated, and then the gray dots are intended to reflect, multiple different monitoring locations around the world. And then once this is completed, then showing some type of sign up. So one of the first things that should be apparent is in this first set of walkthroughs, the user is not asked to log in. They're only asked to sign up here, and even that is optional. So the first implication of this is that there's a persona that is a non-registered persona. And then once that user has signed up, you'll notice the view changes to a view where the user is logged in. We show this dashboard tab. We show some additional information around maybe some websites or endpoints that you've added, and then some additional drill down detail. So you'll see over here a list of all of the, maybe the sites that I've added. You know, this is just an example of a competitor screenshot that I added that kind of shows some cool graphing over a 24-hour period. The intention, I think, oftentimes with wireframes is not to reinvent the wheel. If you see an example, you know, there's nothing wrong with using that to kind of lead a discussion, because I think in many ways that's what wireframing should be about, is to try to get thoughts down as quickly as possible and then use that as an opportunity to get feedback both with the broader team and also with customers. So even though this is, you know, copying what a third-party competitor has done, the intention isn't to, you know, actually use this real world, but is to use this for inspiration. Maybe when you sit down with the designer or with other team members to try to, you know, understand, you know, does it make sense to have, you know, the current status, is this the right place? Or maybe we should put it, say, on the map as an example. You know, what about some historical stuff here? We show 7 days, 30 days. Is that the right place? Or should we be putting it on, you know, some type of more granular, you know, view like this? So just to kind of continue with the flow, you know, here we've got the ability to edit, select different types of locations, monitoring locations, an example around pricing, some additional concepts, advanced concepts in the settings area. But like I said, the main point here is to try to get those ideas down as quickly as possible so that you can socialize and get feedback on some of these concepts. So with that, I'm going to bring up a new slide. And I'm going to show you how this tooling actually works. You'll see over here, I have this tab called Power Mockup. Let's just expand it. And essentially what I get as a result of this add-in is a set of shapes as part of this palette. So for example, let's just, you know, here's some Android phone shapes, some Bootstrap shapes for the web. If I kind of just scroll down, you'll see, you know, all different kinds of shapes. But, you know, say maybe I want to start with, you know, say just with a browser. So here I have a shape for the browser. I can kind of drag it onto the canvas, resize it. I don't need to worry about, you know, back buttons, forward buttons. I can rename something to whatever, you know, just to kind of illustrate the example. You know, say I wanted to, you know, mock up what it would look like to do a, you know, logon page as an example. You know, so here I'm just doing, you know, email, you know, maybe I'll add, you know, password as an example, right? I can then add a button, right? So you get the idea, but, and then now if I wanted to show it, you know, it kind of looks like an example of an experience where someone might, you know, type in username, password, hit login, and then you can work on the next screen. The idea is to be able to quickly iterate through some concepts without having to worry about a lot of the complexity that I guess somewhat more sophisticated tools might introduce. For example, things like, you know, what is the size of this text box, the width, the height, things like that. What colors are you going to be using? Those are all good things, in my opinion, to be tackled later. But the quicker you can get an idea down and start getting feedback on the idea from past experience, I found to be incredibly useful. I can do the same for mobile. So for example, if I add a new slide here, let's say we bring up Android. Oh, there was we just missed it, sorry. If I just scroll down to where we were, we had like a smartphone example. So here's a, what a smartphone might look like. I can resize that once again. Scroll back up. So if I find Android. So here, once again, I've got, things like status bars that I might want to put at the top. I can do inputs like we did before, where maybe I've got, email. Let's say I copy this guy. Password. Say I want to have a button here. Right, you get the idea. I'm just trying to simulate what we just saw. So here, once again, I can very quickly, from a mobile perspective, start mocking up from web to mobile, and kind of evolve some of those concepts. A great example, I think, that we had talked through last time was, something I can find. A great example that we talked through last time was, since this is a web scenario, I'm showing a map here, a map that I didn't create. I just, found it on the web and thought it would be good to kind of, good way to represent the fact that you've got distributed locations around the world. So it's, once again, it's something for conversation. But in this example, like we discussed last time, this is not necessarily optimized for a mobile device. It's optimized for, mobile maybe in landscape mode, and then really, tablet and up. So, so I'm intentionally showing you some early draft wireframes, once again, just to stimulate the conversation, because everything I do as a wireframe. Any kind of concept, any kind of feature, I mock it up in a wireframe, I attach it to some task in Jira for a developer, and then it's very concrete in terms of visually what something needs to look like, and then a discussion on how you might actually go about implementing it. And more often, what I do is, once I have something nice and well defined that already has received feedback, it's at that point that I then sit down with the designer and start fleshing out some concepts. So a simple thing is, over here, this isn't very pretty, where we show just this bubble that appears and this green dot. No doubt designers have got great feedback on how to visually, improve something like this. But a simple concept like we're seeing, does wonders in trying to, convey the basics, which can then be expanded upon. And like I say, in this scenario, it's optimized for web and desktop, tablet, and so on. But we could very easily, have mocked up a, portrait scenario on a small device where instead of showing a graphical map, we could be showing a text-based view of the same results. And that's one of the cool things about, using a tool like this, is I get to flesh out a scenario like that very quickly without much ceremony around something like that.
So Mark,
I'll pause there and ask any questions.
Yeah, so I have a question. So when you are sitting with a designer or with a customer,
yeah,
do you just flip through the PowerPoint slides, or do you create animations sometimes?
Well, so this exact set of wireframes that I walked you through, I literally sat down with the customer, multiple customers, as well as the development team, and walked through this in detail. And this then evolved into something, a bit more refined, but this is the starting point in many cases. And like I say, the same is true when, you know, evolving, say, in this example, a map to a text-based view for a phone. I mock that up, and then I show that to a customer and get their feedback on whether or not, you know, the concept makes sense, the layout makes sense, and only then do I then sit down with the designer to kind of take it forward, and then repeat the same thing. Once we have the design, you know, is to show the customer again.
Yeah, I'm sort of asking specifically about how you do it with PowerPoint, how you display it. And so here, for instance, the example with the green dot in Cape Town. So that is a new slide, right?
Exactly, yeah. So if I go into slide mode, I assume what you're seeing is basically looks like a browser. And then as I click through it, it's showing the transitions, right? And that's one of the cool things. Do you ever use
PowerPoint animations?
I'm just using slide transitions, you know, to kind of go through this. And that, once again, I know it sounds like really simple, but it's incredibly powerful, because what I can do is I can start, you know, hot linking all of the menu items. So when I click on support, I get taken to the support page. When I click on pricing, I get taken to the pricing page. So that from an end user perspective, it looks like you're actually demoing something that's real, but it's in PowerPoint, which is kind of cool.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And the other cool thing is, oftentimes, as I'm sure you've all experienced, is when you're having these conversations with, whether it's customers or whether it's a development team, there's feedback. Feedback about moving stuff around, about changing concepts, even the idea of evolving, you know, a map into a tabular view. You can very quickly create that mock-up right then and there. Once again, go into, you know, presentation mode and ask for feedback in real time on whether or not that concept captures the idea. And the other cool thing, like most prototyping tools today, you know, is the ability to provide comments. So for people who are doing this offline, you know, you can send them, you know, link to the presentation, and they can then capture their comments on the various different screens, which is also kind of a useful concept, you know, then to incorporate feedback. Any questions before I move on? Cool. So the next.
Just a minute.
Go ahead.
So we've been asked, if you have no sales yet, who are you asking to see this mock-up? How do you approach them so they don't think this is a hidden sales call? I assume that's what Becky is asking. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from, where, you know, whether it's no sales or no customers, but I think that's part of the, you know, the initial challenge is, you know, we might have an idea that we think is great, but, and we could spend, you know, months and many thousands of dollars building a solution to solve that problem. But the question at the end of the day is, how many people are actually going to find that problem space and the solution to that problem space something that they can resonate with, let alone something that they can actually want to use in terms of a solution to solve that problem. And I think that's often part of the challenge, is not to stop trying to find customers or potential users just because you don't have a finished product. And I think that's often where being creative, you know, comes into play. An example that I had shared was I was working with this desktop management as a service company. They had built a really cool public-facing website. They talked about problem statements, some cool graphics, but they didn't have a product. And for a year, development team working heads down, building the product, still customers had not been shared anything. But what they did the marketing team was they went and they had a pretty aggressive campaign, whether it was on LinkedIn, some of the other business sites that are out there, and they drummed up a lot of interest, so much so that they had an early sign-up page, still no product, had over 1,000 users sign up where they expressed an interest in what they were doing, and still, even with no product, customers. They had identified a core set of customers. In this example, 1,000 customers. So there's a great example where, trying to tap into that audience to then give feedback is hugely valuable, as opposed to spending, months, behind closed doors, trying to solve a problem that you think customers want. You can kind of try to, find a balance. Now, it isn't always, that simple. But I think that nowadays, especially with social technology, I think there's a lot of creative and interesting ways that people can use the technology to try to identify those target customers before having anything, actually final and released. Cool. If there are no more questions, then I'll move on to the next example, and that's around a competitor matrix. So I'm a big believer in doing competitive analysis as early as possible where it makes sense. This is an example where essentially what I did was I went and I looked at, in the space that I was trying to compete in, who are some of the major players in this space? Logged on, signed up with their tools, got to actually, be hands-on and play with the tools to get a better feel for it. And then what I started to do was I started to break down in the first column, what are some of the things that are common across all of these various different competitors? Now, forget the domain that this is going after or that this is trying to talk about. The same concept applies to any domain that you might be going after. And oftentimes, there are manual types of scenarios that customers have to, that deal with in their organizations that often then get automated to some type of electronic solution. And even there, is a great example to try to list out, what are some of the unique sets of capabilities that's specific to that problem that customer is tackling. In this example, as I mentioned, the scenario is around monitoring a website, and in terms of competitors, the way that they have historically approached it is having different monitoring locations. Some have international, some have a lot of international, some don't, and then different protocols, different frequencies, and so on. So what I try to do is I build the exhaustive list and then try to find the overlap across these various different competitors. Why? Because at the end of the day, I think there's a very important conversation, which we touched on Wednesday, around table stakes versus differentiation. Everything that's shown on this slide, I guess you can kind of consider as table stakes in this scenario. To be able to have a competitive solution, you got to be able to monitor something. You have to be able to monitor from more than one location. You got to be able to use out-of-the-box protocols. You got to be able to notify people. You got to be able to log stuff, and you got to be able to, maybe charge for stuff or not charge for stuff. So, like I said, you can apply the same concept to, whatever scenario you were going after. Just using the right language for your space. And then the idea is then to break out in these columns where your competitors sit. So competitor A, in this example, would be the primary competitor that we're going after. And what's unique about their, freemium versus paid solution versus competitive B. And then some scenarios around, well, what would an MVP look like? What would a post MVP look like? So if this is MVP 1, MVP 2, or version 2, what does version 3 look like? So the idea is, once again, to start getting some orientation around, what's min bar versus what's differentiation. And then, on this slide, what I've attempted to do is to try to highlight, where, an initial swag on where we might make money and how one might monetize that. So for the freemium solution, pretty much everything's free, with the exception of, in this example, maybe having, text messages that a customer pays for. In the paid scenario, there's some stuff that, is unique to paid, and then, same goes for like how frequently you monitor, whether or not you get, more than 2 months of logs, and so on. Once again, this is just a swag. The idea here is to try to use this information to inform not just your wireframes, but also the roadmap, to also inform maybe some of the architectural decisions that you might make, also to form your go-to-market messaging. If you know that you're only going to release this column, like in the first 3 to 6 months, and it's going to take you another 3 to 6 months to get to the second column, or maybe longer, then don't talk about the stuff in the second column, right? Sure, you can write up whatever customer speak you want to share for going to market, but it doesn't make sense to release, it may not make sense to release that in the initial phase. Alternatively, you could argue maybe some of that might make sense, because you could talk aspirationally about things to come, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, that's the approach that I took, where we actually shared everything that's coming down the line. And the main reason for that is because, one, transparency. None of our competitors did that. Two, in terms of the competitive landscape, there was a lot of overlap with these competitors, but what we were planning to do with version 2 and version 3, no one was doing that. I mean, in some areas they were, but holistically they weren't. And that was kind of a cool way to show, for customers who wanted to adopt now, there's a whole bunch of stuff coming down the line that would be really, really worthwhile to them, potentially worthwhile to them, which would make sense, or be a reason for them to, consider moving from a competitor to our solution, and then, getting in for the long haul. So with that, any questions? Cool. So the next example that I wanted to share was around roadmap, and we touched on this previously, but I'm a big believer in trying to document as much as possible from a customer scenario perspective, and then try to prioritize that out. So if we think back to the wireframes, I like to do something visual first, because the visual helps capture some of the experience and some of what we have in our heads, and also getting it down visually helps to kind of rejigger and refine things. I think once you've socialized the visual, rough wireframes, iterated and improved on those till you're like 80–90% confident, I think it's at that point, which is a great time to then start drilling down into these customer scenarios. So just to recap, what we saw was a persona. So this is just Agile Stories, a persona that was a non-subscriber, being able to check the status of their website using common protocols. So the idea behind these stories is to focus on the what, the who, the what, and the why, and not the how. And especially for technical founders, there's a level of comfort in focusing on the how, but the how is easy once you figure out the what and the why and the who. So this is an attempt to try to get some of the thinking down, on paper. And I love a tool like Excel. Once again, there's tons of tools out there that do this, but starting in a tool like Excel, I find incredibly powerful, because you don't get distracted by learning a new tool and so on, learning new concepts. So, here's an example for a non-subscriber, and then here's an example for a subscriber, where maybe, you know, you want to get text messages back or maybe notified into Slack or something like that. Additionally, we talked about, you know, prioritizing each of these customer scenarios, and really the prioritization helps with the roadmap. It helps you plan what's coming first versus what's coming second. And some of this may have to do with just, you know, table stakes. These are the things that I gotta have as like just basics. Some of it might have to do with effort, where some features might take much longer to implement. Waiting to maybe have some of those features may not make sense for, you know, waiting to hold up an MVP while, you know, being able to do those things in parallel. We also, you know, kind of touched on costing. So I like to use t-shirt size costing, you know, where we kind of translate. This doesn't necessarily talk about the developer's experience. This just assumes, you know, on average, small equals 1 developer day, medium equals 3 developer days, and so on. So the idea is we get to cost out, you know, each of these scenarios, and then ultimately at the end we get a tally on, for priority 1, how many man hours is this going to take? Cool, it's going to take, you know, 250. Well, we want to go to market quicker than X, therefore we need to have 2 or 3 developers. How you might get to the costing, you know, maybe to, you know, sit down. If you don't have a technical founder, I'd highly recommend finding one. But if you don't have a technical founder, you know, then to maybe find, you know, someone that, whether a developer lead, that can help kind of cost some of this out. And you can, you know, this is a great tool to then be able to get a quote if you're looking at third-party, you know, dev houses to help you with this. Great way to get a quote, you know, on what it would cost to kind of build some of this out. I think as I also mentioned, I like to be able to include table stakes versus differentiation. I've not seen this used very often, but I think it's an incredibly powerful concept because it talks about, especially if you've got competitors, what's the min bar to be able to compete, you know, versus to be able to differentiate yourself. And I think that's a hugely powerful conversation to have, especially if you're working with other folks and you have investors and you have other founders, to get everyone on the same page on who you're going after and why you're going after them and how you're going to compete if there's competition. Free versus paid, you know, and then ultimately what I do is once I have a very well-defined list and internal priorities, I then create a survey that I then share with my customers. It doesn't have this level of detail, but it has some of the core concepts. Get feedback on that, influence my prioritization. I then add an additional column, you know, which then talks about customer priorities. And then there's a conversation internally to try to reconcile. Well, customer said, you know, we needed to do X first, but the effort to do it and the competitive reasons to do it maybe don't make sense. So there's justification on not maybe doing it first, even though you know that maybe customers are going to complain. And that's okay. It's part of the balance of keeping in check what the business desires, what customers desire, and actually getting something to market in a timely and cost-effective fashion. And then once I've kind of gone through this exercise, gotten, you know, feedback from a survey perspective, I then take this and import it into a tool, say like Jira, and create my epics. I got stories. I can then create tasks for each of these things, you know, and it's that point where you have a pretty well-baked plan that you can start, you know, looping in developers to start working on something like this. At least that's been my experience. Any questions?
Yeah, Mark, could you just talk a little bit about ethics?
Sure. I guess, you know, people approach it differently, but, you know, epics in some ways, you know, are, you know, some of the big buckets of work that maybe you're going after. So maybe like version 1 might be the free blah, blah, blah. You know, you could have, you know, an epic or a set of epics, you know, that try to orient around this free set of functionality, free monitoring, free notification, free whatever. And then to have, you know, subsequent epics that then focus on maybe paid, maybe you've got some unique stuff that you want to do that maybe other competitors aren't doing, you know, like outage prediction, things like that. The idea is to try to, you know, have these big buckets of work. Another way that I've seen, you know, people do this is around categories where, you know, the epics are actually, you know, these things where you've got, you know, like the home page, the monitors, the notifications, and so on. And you break the work down into these kind of groups, you know, where maybe there's a team working specifically on the home page and a team working specifically on some other functionality. So at the end of the day, I think a lot of this is just around grouping, and, you know, it comes down to doing what makes sense for you. But the important thing is, you know, I think probably the most important around Agile is keeping that customer in mind. Who are you going after? How are you going after them? And what problems are you trying to solve? I think that's what's important. How you then cut and slice it, there's tons of examples, and, you know, and people work differently in many ways, whatever makes sense for you. Any other questions? Cool. So I thought it also would be worthwhile touching on business model. I know we very briefly kind of touched on this previously, but and I thought this was a useful time in the presentation to kind of talk through this. But and of course, often, not often, but, you know, typically everything that we've been talking through happens in parallel. Building wireframes, defining your customer scenarios, building a business model, you know, typically happens in parallel. But I think there's often value in doing like the examples that I've shared, and actually doing some of those things in detail, because in many ways it helps inform things like a business model. So for example, how do we come up with subscription price? Well, we looked at competitors. We try to understand how much competitors were charging. We saw the most, you know, the most expensive was X, the cheapest was Y. And, you know, we made a call to say, well, we think we should cost X for these reasons. One of the reasons for coming up with price could be to actually remove price as an adoption blocker. In this example, the decision that I made was actually to come up with a price that's cheaper than everyone. So that, like I say, price is not a reason, or should not be a reason for customers to not adopt something that they find useful and actually helps them solve a specific problem. So as part of the business model, and this is just using a template that we used at Techstars, as part of the business model, you know, we kind of, you know, drill into some additional things, you know, once again, just set of hypotheses, you know, on average, you know, how much a customer is going to churn every month, the types of add-ons that people might, you know, rough number, what percentage of subscribers are going to select add-ons, how much we think we're going to spend on advertising, what we think the conversion is going to be for Google ads versus, you know, Facebook, LinkedIn ads, you know, various different, you know, conversion metrics, in this case, paid conversion versus organic traffic conversion, what we think organic traffic might grow at on a monthly basis, and so on, how much we think we're going to pay, cost per click. Once again, the idea here is just taking, you know, hopefully using experience and some of the industry stats around some of this, but just to take a swag that says, this is what I think, you know, the world is going to look like. And then once you're up and running, is then to come back to this and keep this as a living, breathing thing, which then helps evolve and inform where something is at. The same thing, you know, goes for, you know, things like infrastructure costs. If you ran one monitoring location, how much would that cost you? I can speak for hours on, you know, how I came up with this number, but the long and the short of it is, You know, I knew there were a multitude of ways to solve this problem. One was to kind of custom build our own solution. But, you know, now with cloud technology being where it is, there are multiple sets of technology to kind of solve, or at least to provide the infrastructure to do the thing that we needed to do, which is to check, you know, websites. So there are a variety of services that third parties provide. So it's looking at, you know, the pricing list for those, and then kind of having a conversation on pros and cons, build our own versus use this one that may not be architecturally the best, but maybe the cheapest and get us to market quicker, versus use the one that's architecturally best, but is actually the most expensive and would take us longer. So pros and cons of all these to then settle on, well, I think this will be the best approach, which is kind of the middle of the two. And then the real proof comes in to proving out the technology, you know, through some focus sprints, you know, to make sure that it does what you hope it's going to do in a time frame, you know, that you've budgeted for, and so on. And then, you know, things like support. So the idea is to, you know, take a bunch of assumptions and then to try to forecast them out, you know, over some period of time. And I'm sure you've all been through, you know, something like this. But, you know, here is an example. If we kind of scroll forward, we can see the breakdown. So let's say, you know, we were heads down, we built something, we released an MVP to a private audience and incorporated the feedback. Let's say that took us 6 rough months to kind of work through that. And by month 7-ish, you know, we're starting to get our Facebook ads, our Google ads up and running, and, you know, kind of testing with a very small audience. And then bang, month 8, we go live with our paid advertising. So here, you know, based on some of the conversions that we shared, we get some output on, you know, how many users we're going to attract for the money that we're spending based on the cost per click through these different mediums, Google versus Facebook, direct, and so on. And then we get an output on some number. And the idea here is, you know, when month 8 actually happens, is to then come back at the end of month 8, plug in the action numbers, at the end of month 9, plug in the action numbers, and then, you know, the idea is the spreadsheet then continues to update and evolve and get better at forecasting out what the future might look like. The same goes from a sales perspective. So we included some assumptions around what we think conversions are going to look like. Maybe we were completely wrong, and it turns out, you know, we're only going to actually get subscribers much later. There's a whole bunch of learnings that, you know, would come from that experience. Why did we make the assumption that we thought we were going to get subscribers up front, but it actually took, you know, many more months to get those subscribers. And then, you know, really what I think is probably one of the most, you know, valuable tools is getting to some type of subscriber economic, which is hard to do if you don't have some of those assumptions kind of broken out, you know, and then kind of talk through, you know, some of the detail that as best as you can at that moment in time. So, for example, over here, we took a swag and we said, you know, we think we're going to make X amount per month over a 12-month period. We're going to have a gross profit of Y. We think as a result, the subscription gross profit is X. There's a bunch of add-ons that people are going to make. And total for, you know, on average for users, we think we're going to generate the following amount per year. Why is this important? Well, one of the other things that you know, is useful as part of this process is understanding how we're going to acquire customers. And we've kind of talked a little bit about that in the business model, you know, using things like the various different social media platforms as well as Google to try to, you know, pay for customers. But ultimately we get some type of value that, you know, should be emitted, which is the customer acquisition cost. So over here, we can see, this is just for 12 months, we can see that if we were to acquire Facebook versus Google, we know that it's going to be much more expensive. We can also see roughly how many months it's going to take to pay back. So, you know, within, you know, almost little under a year, you know, we're going to pay back. That's assuming we get the conversions, but that's part of this whole exercise. Google, we're going to, you know, convert a lot cheaper, and pay back a lot quicker. You know, so here, one of the SaaS metrics that I'm sure you all have used, you know, is lifetime value over customer acquisition cost. So we get an output, you know, which helps us kind of keep real on, are we spending the right amount, you know, for this period of time? And in this case, like I said, we only did 12 months, but what if we did 100 months? So over here, we get to spit out a number that you know, that hopefully gives us some more insights, you know, into the long-term viability of how we're, you know, planning to approach something like this. So, like I say, you know, maybe we started out with 12 months, but you know, ultimately you wanted to kind of model out 100 months. The idea is hopefully, you know, using a business model to try to influence and inform something like that, so that we have insights into whether or not we're spending just the right amount, or spending too much, or spending too little, and so on. And this kind of leads me into the next set of topics, which we're going to talk about, you know, which is trying to get some insights on how we're acquiring customers, whether it's effective or not, doing some A/B tests, and so on. Before that, any questions? I think you're muted there, Rick.
Yeah. Could you just help people understand what an A/B test is?
Sure. So an A/B test is to try to prove out a bunch of scenarios. So for example, in the scenario that I walked you through in the wireframes, if you recall, if I just go back to this, we prompt the user, at least the thinking was, we prompt the user to sign up once we've shown them a set of results, right? So in that scenario, what that implies is that, you know, people can use this thing for free. There's no real restriction on getting a user to sign up. This is the hypothesis is, if there's enough value, then hopefully there'll be enough reason for a user to sign up. So now the question comes into play. Maybe you're, you know, 6 months, 12 months, you've been live. The question is, well, now you've got some metrics on what signups look like. How could you improve the signups? So one scenario could be, what if you don't show any results, but you force someone to sign up? That's the first part of the A/B test. Another part could be, maybe you give them free results twice, but on the third attempt, you force them to sign up. So there's an example where you don't have the data, but you've come up with some creative ways to potentially get access to more data, and you've created some scenarios to try to capture that data. So that's a real-world example that I went through, where we had the benchmark. We knew, you know, on average we were spending X and we were getting Y from a sign-up perspective. The question that I then asked myself was, can we do better? And then it was to try to unpack, well, what does better look like? And how might that manifest itself? And that's an example that I, you know, then try to experiment with, forcing versus not forcing, versus, you know, 2 attempts and then 3rd attempt, you know, get someone to sign up. Does that help answer your question, Rick?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So, you know, so kind of whirlwind tour. So you've, you know, done some great wireframing, you've gotten some great feedback, you've evolved and iterated upon those wireframes, you know, you've built out your customer scenarios, prioritized, gotten feedback, built a business model, now would probably be a good time to be taking those wireframes that hopefully reflect 90+% of what you're planning to build, and hopefully align with what customers see as something worthwhile. So there are a variety of tools that can be used to prototype. I'm a big believer in writing code as late as possible. That doesn't mean you're not kind of like writing code to test, some infrastructure concepts, but in terms of what customers are going to see and what they're going to get, the later you can start writing code, the better. And the reason for that is because all of this pre-work that we've just been through often takes many, many months of 12-hour days, 7 days a week, just to get to a really solid plan. And once you have a solid plan, from past experience, once you have a solid plan, it's very easy to then start writing code to address that plan. But when things are kind of up in the air and not very crisp and not very concrete, there ends up being a lot of churn when it comes to implementing, because you end up proving a bunch of concepts, testing those concepts, seeing them, changing them, iterating on them, and what would have taken 3 months ends up taking 6 months. And that, of course, is a huge tax to pay, because you obviously, now have developer salaries that you're paying, and so on. So everyone's different, but that is what I have found to be very effective. So let me just bring up browser. So like I say, I like using proto.io. There's no shortage of tools out there. And that's also part of the problem, is that there's too many choices. But here's an example where I'm just going to use their sample project. So the idea is I can take those wireframes that I've created and then use much the same, a similar canvas to flesh the detail out with maybe a bit more pretty user experience. And this is probably a great time to potentially involve a designer, because often going from a somewhat more coarse-grained wireframe to a lot more fine-grained wireframe, I think is very valuable in bringing in a designer. The problem with a world like this is now you got all this detail for every text box that you have here. So in this case, the password text box, you got sizes, width, length, height, colors, border colors, all of that. That assumes that you're very buttoned up when it comes to your branding strategy. Often that's something that happens in parallel and takes quite a bit of time to flesh out what fonts are you going to use, what colors are you going to use, let alone what your logo is going to look like. How does your logo render on different form factors and things like that. So a tool like this is incredibly helpful. And one of the useful things behind a tool like this is they provide plugins where a designer can use Photoshop. This is the preferred approach that I take, is to essentially take the wireframes that you have in PowerPoint and then to recreate those wireframes in Photoshop. And then once you've kind of collaborated on that, provided feedback, the Photoshop plugin, or Sketch if someone prefers to do it in Sketch, but most designers I've worked with use Photoshop, is the Photoshop plugin then allows you to export all of those screens into a tool like proto.io. And then the cool thing is you can then start doing hotspots where, typing stuff in and then clicking, when I click, something happens. And that's one of, much like we saw in PowerPoint, but, same concept translates into a world like this. So to kind of see what this looks like, if I click preview, you'll see this now renders. And we then get to start interacting with this now much prettier set of wireframes. I can, type stuff in, put in a password, click on sign in. You see I get some stuff rendered, click on details. So a lot of the core concepts that we would have had in a somewhat, more coarse-grained sort of wireframes, would be a lot more polished when it comes to something like this. Specific fonts, specific colors, font sizes, specific in terms of rendering for certain types of real estate, and so on. The other cool thing with something like this is you can then share these links with customers. So a customer can then, almost use it as though it was an app, whether it's in a browser or Pro.io actually has an application. And the idea is to have that user simulate, what an experience might look like, which is kind of cool. Any questions about that? Nope. Cool. But just to reiterate, I would not recommend starting here though. A lot of concepts to learn. You can spend days just kind of getting wrapped up in this world, as opposed to using low-tech tool, even paper, to kind of flesh out and get yourself 80–90% of the way in terms of core concepts. So, maybe now you've, actually built something, you've released something to customers. So the KPI example is one that we kind of just talked through. So this is using OKRs, which I think Google and was it Intel kind of pioneered. But whether you use an OKR or a KPI, it really doesn't matter. The idea here is to try to be explicit about what your objective is and what you expect the key result to be. So just to kind of recap the A/B test that we previously walked through, the objective that I created was to understand how registration affects sign-up. The intuition that I had was, if we could increase sign-up by, let's say, 10%, I mean, that's pretty cool, right? And the way that this worked is to reflect on something that we did as part of this. So the example was we launched a set of A/B tests to try to understand what motivates a registration. The three scenarios was the no registration, so you pretty much do whatever you could do, versus force someone to sign up after their second attempt, versus force someone to sign up without showing them anything. And then some results. So in this case, there were a number of customers that, so after implementing this A/B test, now we have a bunch of analytics data to hopefully be able to track the success of something like this, to learn which approach has the highest conversion. And the finding was the forced login had the highest conversion. And I'm going to show an analytics example that actually delves into something like this. So, one could ask, well, what was the reason why, in terms of learning, what was the reason why doing a forced login and not showing anything and then providing a login had the highest conversion? And my interpretation was, one, clearly the content that's being shown is worth registering. And secondly, this is just my gut instinct, is that there's probably a precedent that's already been set by competitors that don't offer anything free. They require you to sign up. well, sorry, they offer for free, but to get past that wall of showing you something, they want something in return, which is a sign up. So, so the idea here was to clearly state an objective and to define some key results, and then to reflect and be honest about the change that was made and the learning that we had, and to make sure that some of these pieces are in place, like being able to actually get analytics information, you know, from something like that. So once we had the learning, then the next thing was on the following week was, cool, so what are we going to work on this week? And the idea here was to see if we could increase the conversion rate even further. And, you know, maybe we were previously getting, say, you know, 28% conversions, and now we wanted to, you know, effectively double that. And the why, well, we clearly learned that forcing users to log in had the highest conversion. Well, what if we remove the A/B test and we remove the other approach, which is, you know, not requiring to log in, and effectively force everyone to register? We now have the baseline, we have the A/B test data, and this may not be week to week, maybe it's over the month, depending on how many users you have and how much data you have. But the idea is to get to some level of statistical significance, not 5 users, not 10 users, but, you know, closer to 100 users, you know, where you can kind of model out, you know, some of this findings. Maybe there's, you know, backlog, you know, where you got to make sure that you've got the baseline data captured. You got to make sure that you can at least deploy, you know, these aspirational scenarios, and that you don't go and screw things up, so that, you know, data that you're capturing gets overwritten by some other data, which ultimately screws up, you know, this entire testing scenario. And then, of course, you know, there's the unknown on how quickly am I going to see this data. If I only have, you know, 100 users, well, I might have to wait a while. But if I have 1,000 users and they're fairly active, then, you know, or I have 1,000 signups or 100 signups every month, then, you know, we might see this a lot quicker. Any questions about this before I move on? Cool. So the next scenario is, and this is kind of like a two-part thing, is, and if it wasn't obvious, but I'm huge when it comes to analytics. I believe the more data that you have, the better. At some point, you're probably going to want to use it. You may not necessarily use it up front, but I have pretty much fairly consistently seen MVPs, V1s released with 0 analytics data. 6 months, 12 months later, no data. And basic questions then become very difficult to answer. So highly recommend, you know, not releasing anything without analytics data. And if that means delay a month, highly recommend delaying a month. That's just been my experience. So 2 scenarios I wanted to show you. The one is, just trying to cycle through. The one is on using using a product called Crazy Egg. Had some issues logging onto my account. They no longer do free trials. It's all paid, so bear with me. But the example is, in terms of how I used it, is you get to get some information about where the hotspots are on your website. So for example, if you know, maybe had a login screen or something like that, and every time people hit that login screen, there's an issue, but you aren't sure what the issue is. If people are clicking on forgot password, a heat map would basically highlight that that's a hot zone, and people are clicking on forgot password. So now the question is, well, why can't people remember their password? A real world scenario, there was an issue, and I can't recall whether it was browser specific or what the problem was, But for some reason, when people typed in their password, it wasn't being handled correctly. And as a result, logins were failing. So I know this sounds real simple, but in a couple of browsers that we tested, didn't have an issue. I don't know whether it was on mobile, but I can't remember. But as a result of implementing, with heat map technology like this, what we saw was a lot of clicks on the forgot password. People would reset their password, and for whatever reason, following reset, everything worked and they were able to log in. So this is actually some pretty cool technology. The other cool thing is, especially in the single page app world, pros and cons, often people now have to scroll pages and pages and pages to get to sections of your website. So a scroll map report is actually helpful because you can kind of see where most people kind of read and then where people basically don't even bother scrolling down to. So in terms of rethinking how you present content, scroll map reports are actually quite helpful. The other cool thing is, out of the box, you also get recordings. So, once again, if you're getting 5, 10 signups a month, being able to then go back and see what each of these people are doing, how they're using your website, is actually pretty powerful. So out of the box, you get recordings, and you can kind of see where people are clicking, what they're doing, how they're using the website in maybe ways that you hadn't even imagined. And this is actually a surprisingly interesting feature because, once again, you aren't able to control browser versions, operating system versions, all of the interesting nuance, screen real estate, how someone reads something, portrait, landscape, and so on. Fascinating. And by being able to record what people are doing, once again, right out the box, every week you can then go back and review and just watch what people are doing and identify potential issues and then iron out some of those issues. And then lastly, there's a competitor. There's no shortage of competitors, but this is another one. I originally wanted to use Hotjar. Can't recall what the reason was in using this versus Crazy Egg, but it just came down to pricing. Crazy Egg was cheaper and free at the time. It's now paid, but still pretty cheap, versus something like Hotjar. But I think these guys are the ones that, all of the big guys were using from the beginning, whereas some of the competitors are now, eating up a lot of that space in the market right now. Any questions on that before I move on to the next example? And I know we're also approaching the end of time, so I just wanted to I think this is the last slide.
Yeah, Mark, let's make sure we leave about, 7 minutes here. I know that Dan has an announcement to make, and we'll see if anyone wants to ask a question, and I have 1 or 2 comments.
Cool, yeah, I'm almost there, so I think this is the last one. But, so in this scenario, it's using out-of-the-box Google Analytics to try to understand how are you acquiring customers and how effectively, from the channel that you've acquired them, how effectively are they converting? So in this is real world. In this scenario, after many, many months of growth hacking, I was able to get our paid search conversions to convert to around 60%, which basically means for every 10 people that click on an ad, 10 become a lead. And I'm sure most of you, if you've been through this, this is a pretty good number. This is a number to be proud of. Very rarely do we see numbers this high. Usually they're much lower, 10, 15, 20, 25% even. Those are good numbers. But a lot of this has to do with very specific targeting, which is part of the power of using Google Analytics and so on. Very specific targeting to users and very specific messaging around the ads. So what we see over here, is 60% for paid, but we also see some decent conversions around just people who are directly hitting the website. We see, you know, people are actually spending time on the website, not just abandoning it, you know, with fairly low bounce rates. So the way that I implemented this was using an out-of-the-box feature called goals. We talked about funnels on Wednesday, and yes, funnels are very helpful for the sales process, but funnels also apply to the customer acquisition process. How did you acquire the customer, and what did the customer do once you acquired them? In this case, the first phase that we were focused on, and top of the funnel, was making sure that we get customers to convert to a lead. And to convert to a lead means you actually have to do something on our website that's specific to our problem space. And as long as you did that, we then bucketed you into a lead. So in Google speak, you need to actually be able to emit an event that captures this specific goal. Not rocket science to do, but it does take a little bit of code. And effectively what I did then was I had a set of goals that we had broken out so that we could capture during our A/B test. So, so this was the baseline. What I then did was I broke out a goal that was for account creation. So you can see over here, of the roughly 300 unique users, roughly 5 were converting into creating an account. So this is the scenario where they were using for free. They weren't asked to sign up. Well, they were asked to sign up, but they could bypass the sign up and then just continue using for free, continue using for free. So what this is about a roughly 1% conversion, right? From the 300. So in terms of the 2 A/B tests, this was forced to sign up after 3 attempts. You'll see over here, even lower number. Fascinating, right? I was very surprised by this. But this is the most fascinating, right? Same period, but notice 25 users signed up. So we're getting almost 10% conversion by doing a forced sign up through this A/B test, which, you know, versus the, 5 before, we basically just did a, 5-fold increase through something as simple as testing how registration affects signups. Fascinating. Like I say, everything's available out of the box. You just got to do a little bit of work. One, to define the goals, be clear what your goals are, define the goals, put in place a way to measure, and then actually be able to report on it. With that, I wanted to turn over to questions. Hopefully this has been useful. Also, if you have any follow-up, my email's at the beginning of the slide deck. We'd love to, continue dialogue in whatever way possible. But I'll pass it on to Rick and Dan.
Mark, thank you very much. This was fantastic. We'll open up the questions in just a second.
Cool.
First of all, I posted the link to the survey for this session. I'd like to ask you to all complete that as soon as possible. And the other thing I wanted to say is please share your experiences with friends. I don't think we have a real limit on how many people can attend these sessions. We have another one coming up with Mark on Wednesday at 11 a.m. to 12 Mountain Time. And we'd love to have more people. So with that, Dan, I know you had an announcement to make, and then we can open up to questions.
Yeah, I wanted to just make a quick announcement that I have opened up the speakers. So if you do want to unmute yourself and ask a question through your voice, you're more than welcome to, as well as, of course, if you want to write into the chat box, we will be looking at that for Mark as well. We are going to continue this Stay Engaged series after our Ask Us Anything session with Mark, talking a little bit about funding resources for startups in New Mexico during the pandemic. So please come to the session on 4/1, the Ask Us Anything, with your questions, as well as we will be able to talk a little bit more about what we're going to be working on with the funding topic as well. That was my announcement.
Okay. Questions? Sammy's asking, do you have any comments about paid advertising, being necessary or generating revenue by selling advertising or a freemium base?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess there are different camps. Some camps, especially a lot of investors that I've worked with, don't like funding advertising. And instead, I guess, use that as a way to force founders to be creative in creating buzz and creating demand without spending any money on paid advertising, especially in the early phase of a product. And of course, depending on the nature of the product, there's tons of avenues, whether it's through the Kickstarter equivalents or whether it's through things like Product Hunt and whatnot. There's no shortage of ways, even just creating buzz on LinkedIn and Facebook. There's no shortage of, getting, influencers on Instagram. There's no shortage of ways to be able to drum up a fair amount of, a fair following without spending a penny. Having said that, I think there's also a lot of value, personally. I kind of sit in both camps. I think you've got to do both. So I think this isn't about one or the other. I think this is about both. I think if you're only going to spend money to acquire a customer, I think that may be a little limited. And if you're only going to focus on attracting customers, through creative ways that don't require any money, I think that also might be a bit limited. So I'm a big believer in using paid advertising. The other thing that I have experienced is that it takes quite a while, not only to learn about all of the ins and outs, the knobs and dials and under the cover advanced settings, but it also takes quite a while to figure out how to message and how to define an audience and how to, how to brand and so on. And that on its own is actually quite a worthwhile exercise. That doesn't mean you have to spend a lot on advertising. You could be spending, $50, $100 a month in the first few months. And, oftentimes you'll blow through that very quickly. But it's important to reflect on why, maybe you blew through all the money and didn't have any conversions, or why you blew through the money and had huge conversions. That on its own, I think, is very important. The other thing that I've experienced is that history, when it comes to paid advertising, is not foretelling of the future. Just because you had an awesome month with paid advertising does not necessarily mean the next few months are going to be awesome. And that is something to also keep in mind, which is why, having different streams of being able to acquire customers and not rely on one versus the other is important.
Well, Mark, thank you very much. I have one parting comment here for everyone. Depending on where your startup is, some of this stuff may seem like it's way far in the future. OKR, managing a team, and having a detailed business plan, things like that. But they do need to be on your radar for your success. So think about them when you have some downtime now, especially because of the current crisis. Take a look at some of these tools, so you'll be aware and be informed about them when you need them. Okay. Well, thank you, and hope to see you all on Wednesday.
Cool. Thanks, Rick, Dan, TJ, and the rest of the community.
Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome.
Stay home, stay, and stay engaged with us. Talk to you next week.